This is going to be the first part in a series ranking and reviewing the 6 Sekki Soulsborne games that FromSoft has put out, hopefully 7 after Elden Ring. I adore these games, every single one, and I want that to be very clear. They have flaws, and I will be pointing them out, and I may focus a little too much on the flaws, but only because I love them so much and want future games to be better. I also recommend that you go play all the games before watching any of these videos, even if it's just a simple playthrough, because there will be spoilers for every single boss and likely every secret, considering the fact that I will have gotten every achievement for every game before I write this review. Spoilers abound, this is your only warning. This series is best experienced completely blind. Before I start, I want to point out that I love Bloodborne. Hell, I platinumed the game just so I'd have a good view on the game for this script. My file at the time had 48 hours, but I'd wager that at least 3 of those were spent idling at the lantern after dying to Orphan. Oh, and getting snacks and stuff. I put it in my top 20 games of all time, maybe 15, only pushed that low because of phenomenal titles like Tetris, Minecraft, Spyro the Dragon 2, and other From Software titles like Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, Demon Souls, and Sekiro. Don't get me wrong, this game has some great moments. The Ludwig and Lady Maria fights, while not the pinnacle of the series, are definitely really good, really fun fights. The teaching power of Gascoigne, and especially Vicar Amelia, cannot be understated. The Forbidden Woods is designed beautifully, and the Chalice dungeons are a great idea, even if executed poorly. However, this game also has by far the lowest lows, and most lows except maybe Dark Souls 2, but I have reasons to like that one over this. I know most people who have played it consider it their favorite, and it even reinvigorated some people to play the other games, and as such I will attempt to be extra thorough with every single point that I make. Let's start with something that Bloodborne does really well, arguably the best of the whole series: atmosphere. The atmosphere of this game is impeccable. Nowhere in the game feels safe, with the exception of the Hunter's Dream. Mostly anyway. Everywhere is thick with atmosphere. An overwhelming, thick, oppressive atmosphere. There is a problem with this, however, that the game is very dull. Even more so than Dark Souls 3, but we'll get there. There are splashes of color, yellow lights, red and blue skies, and so on, but it just feels gray. I don't like how one-note and boring the color palette is, but I'll give it a pass because it strengthens the atmosphere enough. At least the game has a clear daytime sky in at least one main game area, and the first DLC area, but both areas with a blue sky are just covered in gray rocks, so it's kind of ruined. The aesthetic isn't exactly my favorite. I prefer medieval to gothic personally, but I love the disgustingness and the Lovecraftian horror present in this game. The gore all over the place and the frantic screams give such a horrifying atmosphere. Pre-ROM, everything is dark, but rather simple. Just an unsettling night. After ROM, almost everything is revealed. You hear Murgo crying, the blood moon is revealed, enemies change, and you can see the Amygdala. It becomes horrifying and truly a nightmare. Then there's the DLC. There are bloodied, undead corpses, giant beasts with bellies bloated with blood, giant eldritch I want to do this in as few takes as possible. Giant eldritch executioners and hunters cursed to endlessly hunt within the nightmare. Ludwig is a distorted horse monster with eyes inside of his heads. The clock tower has gross experiments, which includes the large-headed enemies. Maria tears into herself, using her own blood to attack. The fishing hamlet is probably my favorite location and aesthetically. The enemies suck, but I'll get to that. It's probably the grossest area, though that may just be because I lived by the ocean for most of my life. I know how bad it would smell, and it honestly turned off my craving for sushi, which is saying a lot, since it's my favorite food. Before we get much farther, the lore is pretty important. I won't do the story of the game justice, so I'll just link Vidya's video in the description, but I'll try to summarize it. The game is very based on Lovecraft's work, too. Master Willem, the guy before Rom in the weird rocky chair, wanted to find the truth, ended up finding the Great Ones, and the Old Blood, in the Chalice dungeons deep below Gehrman. Willem wasn't approving of the use of the Old Blood, and instead wanted insight to become a Great One and to see the truth. Laurence, on the other hand, wanted to use the Old Blood to ascend to a Great One. Laurence founded the Healing Church after leaving Byrgenwerth. The Old Blood healed all ailments, and as such, a lot of people wanted it, but it also caused addiction, and the symptoms of withdrawal was to become a beast. This means that every beast is a former human, not too dissimilar to the undead of Dark Souls, but it's implied that the beasts are still sentient. In fact, when you get to Old Gehrman, the beasts just want to be left alone. All this makes the game a lot sadder than otherwise. It adds a ton to the atmosphere of the game. There's a lot more than that, but that's all I'm going to say for now. Again, if you want more, you should check out Vaati's video. I can't say I like the story more than Dark Souls, but it's pretty good. I definitely like it more than Sekiro's though, especially in the presentation. That's not to say that Sekiro's is inherently worse, I just prefer Bloodborne's and Dark Souls stories. As alluded to above, I'll get to enemies, but to understand why I hate them so much, it's probably more important to talk about their positioning. I was actually inspired to write this from a huge spiel I gave on my Discord, link in the description, on why I didn't like Yahar'gul, specifically the early hidden portion of it. You get there by getting killed by an enemy that shows up after you kill Vicar Amelia, the second required boss. Here is that spiel. The jailers do way too much damage for when you encounter them. Also, you'll most likely die and end up going to Yahar'gul. You know what Dark Souls 1 did with the cool optional areas? It hid them. Didn't care if you missed them, and they were hidden for a reason. To get to the painted world, you had to jump off an elevator, make a jump that didn't even look possible in a game not about platforming, run up some precarious steps, and sit in a bird's nest for 30 seconds. Then you, technically didn't have to, but most people do, so bear with me, had to fight a harder version of the first boss, run back to the very start of the game, fight a Black Knight, likely the second or third you've seen so far, grab a random item, then make your way to Anor Londo. In Anor Londo, you have to get through a room of difficult, fast, and fair enemies and inspect a giant painting, which, if you don't have the doll, gives you no indication that it does anything at all other than an interact prompt. Same with Ash Lake, it's hidden behind an invisible wall, Then there's an arduous climb down one of the most confusing areas in the game, even worse back up if you don't have the Lord Vessel, all to lead up to one of the coolest areas in the game. Bloodborne makes a random super powerful enemy show up after killing a boss that you'll likely die to because it's early in the game, and then you show up in a quote-unquote secret area. You'll most likely won't even get your echoes back because you have to run past multiple of those hard enemies on your way to a lantern. Sure, the area has some nice lore to it, like why were you captured, what did they want from you, but the area itself isn't very fun to explore. First off, there are multiple groups of the jailers, an enemy which you were intended to die to just moments before, which can stun you and one-hit kill you most of the time. That would make it seem like you're supposed to come back later, but they're interspersed with enemies that are easy to kill that you've already seen, like the weird guys with the cloth over their head. On top of that, there's a group of 4 dogs, immediately followed by a group of 2 dogs and a jailer. How is that supposed to be fair? There's a boar right next to another boar, one of which will probably end up attacking you before you know it exists. To get to the boss from the lantern, you need to run past 2 jailers and a cloth guy, 3 dogs and a jailer, 3 more cloth guys, and another group of 2 jailers, meaning you'll likely be at a deficit when you reach the boss. It's an even worse run if you decide to fight Parl when you return later in the game. The area is even worse then, with groups of 5 projectile shooting enemies all ganging up on you at once, which is just straight up unfun. Level design like this persists throughout Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, which I'll get to, but this is probably the most egregious, if not only for it being hidden, though the Archdragon Peak is a close second, especially with one of the bosses there being a microcosm of this kind of level design. That was a spur-of-the-moment complete, but I wasn't mad at the location at the time. I'd just beaten Laurence actually, who's probably my least favorite boss. I'll get there though. In the meantime, let's go through some other areas, since they're the connective tissue running throughout Bloodborne. You start in Central Yharnam. Okay, technically you start in Isefka's clinic, but the first actual level is Central Yharnam. You're introduced to the werewolf, which shows you the importance of your weapon, but even more shows you that death isn't the end. I don't think they necessarily needed the enemy here, but it certainly helps with the atmosphere. You're then introduced to a single enemy out in the open, along with 2 more if you explore, before reaching your first lantern. You get ambushed, which is good to happen early. You're shown a group of enemies, one really hard enemy if you explore, and then a giant group of enemies. This is the infamous bonfire mob of Central Yharnam. This is really well designed. You're shown the enemies and you're given agency over when to go and attack. You can strategize and scope things out. I think it's a little cheap to throw the dogs at you so deep into the mob, but hey, don't get comfortable or think you know what's happening in Bloodborne. Then it expands on this concept, ironically with fewer enemies. You see, the next group of enemies comes in separately. You see 2 dogs, then 2 hunters with more dogs. You tested on your skill of taking on groups in a fast-paced battle. As well as is put together though, I have one big problem with this arrangement. It's not fun. First of all, the gunners and the bonfire mob are super annoying, and you basically have to rush to take them out, or kite others out of their range, one of which puts you in a lot of danger, and the other is slow and boring. I'd also like to give a little gripe real quick. The gunner's tracking is a little too good. Pretty similar story with the dogs, you're just kiting the dogs instead of the other enemies. Sure, that's how the game is, either be aggressive and have fun, or slow and be bored. But there is definitely an in-between. Dark Souls struck this balance perfectly in my opinion. You can be relatively aggressive without putting yourself into the thick of the battle with one simple thing that Bloodborne is missing. A shield. Yeah, there is a shield in Bloodborne, but you're not supposed to use it, that's pretty obvious. It blocks almost no damage and you can't parry with it. So, ignoring the shield like a good hunter, what's the difference that a shield adds in Dark Souls? Or I suppose that Bloodborne detracted from. You can go in, shield raised, not to be passive and slow, but to time and block the hits as they come while recovering stamina. That way you can get into the battle without getting bored out of your mind kiting enemies away or getting demolished by the gunners or dogs, or both. Admittedly, I did learn to play without the shield pretty well, but I still by far prefer having the shield. It's not passive, it's a different kind of aggressive. I suppose now would be a good time to go into the details of combat before covering the rest of the areas. I expect you to have played Bloodborne, but if you haven't because you can't justify buying a PS4 for one game like I did, let me give you the rundown. It's very similar to Dark Souls, but that much is obvious. The counter damage is incredibly annoying, to the point where I've seen some people prefer to tank hits instead of dodging and most likely receiving counter damage. If you don't know, counter damage is done when you're hit during a dodge, but not during the iframes. This works against enemies in Dark Souls, most obvious against Quelaag, for me anyway. In Bloodborne, however, you take double damage if you get countered. The frames during which counter damage is possible feel really odd, but I suppose that's on me. Regardless, you're still locked into attacks after pressing the button. There are still multiple kinds of attacks, fast and slow weapons, similar stats, backstabbing, parrying, limited healing, though that is slightly different. Let's start with that actually. Blood vials. Probably the worst change made to Bloodborne. Yes, there's rallying, where you can recover your health when you get hit if you manage to attack without getting hit quick enough, but that doesn't excuse the blood vials. Hell, I'm okay with having limited parries, since parrying is so powerful in Bloodborne and it's so easy to do, but the blood vials. If you don't know what I'm talking about, healing consumes a resource. Similar to Dark Souls, you can carry a specific number at once, which you can refill while resting. Assuming you have one simple condition met, you have some in storage. They're a finite resource that you need to farm for. Why was this change made? Who decided it would be fun, especially in a game like Bloodborne, to make healing limited? This means if you're dying to a boss over and over, exhausting your healing, you're gonna have to go farm for healing. You know what I love when trying to beat a boss? Being forced to stop and go do something else for a little while. That's fun. The limit doesn't even affect exploration because of how often they're found, but you can't find them in a boss fight, the lifeblood of Soulsborne. They're probably finite to make you want to rally instead, but I would honestly prefer if they worked like Estus, but you could only carry 10 of them or something. That would be preferable and would still accomplish the same goal. It's incredibly annoying. Same goes for Quicksilver bullets, they shouldn't have been finite either. Aside from the vials and bullets, the rest of the combat changes aren't inherently bad. For instance, instead of two-handing any given weapon, you can now transform your weapon with the press of a button. This ranges from giving it a temporary elemental damage boost to making the next attack stronger to completely changing the moveset of the weapon, effectively giving you an entirely different weapon. It's noted by a loud, punchy sound effect that's really nice and obvious. I like this change, but I can't say I prefer it to two-handing. Two-handing gave more options too. It changed the moveset, did more damage based on strength scaling, but also took more stamina. I can't say I prefer either one. One is strategy, one is situational, I suppose. Bloodborne also has far fewer weapons, and all of the main weapons transform in some way. This would be fine if all the weapons were unique, but so many of them are super similar. For instance, there are way too many straight sword movesets. The Threaded Cane, Ludwig's Holy Blade, Blade of Mercy, and Kirkhammer are all straight swords when untransformed, with the saws, maces, safes, curved swords, and axes all being incredibly similar, just short-range, quick attacks. The transforms are pretty cool though. The can turns into a whip. The can. Oh, there was a typo in my script. The cane turns into a whip, the axe turns into a halberd, the Rikuyo transforms into a dual-wielded sword/dagger combo, and the Whirligig saw turns into, well, a saw. The only way to use magic, or arcane, is through items found throughout the world. You won't even find a damaging arcane weapon until after the first required boss, the second you'll likely find. This means most people will completely miss arcane as an option, though it does add replay value, and I don't use magic anyway, so it didn't affect me much. There are barely any ranged weapons, which is weird considering you'll almost always have a gun on you. The gun is a tool more so than a weapon. You can get a cannon, but that takes 12 of your 20 bullets to fire. This means you are funneled down one playstyle, fast and aggressive. A huge amount of base stamina enforces this playstyle too. Unfortunately, this isn't exactly my preferred playstyle. I like strength builds in Dark Souls personally. I'll explain why Sekiro is higher when we get there, since that also kind of funnels you into one single playstyle. Even more aggressively, arguably. Anyway, continuing on with the areas, and don't worry, I won't be going play by play for too long, it's just relevant for when the game is trying to teach you stuff. You eventually run into 2 werewolves, a challenge for any new player to be sure. Soon after, you reach your first real jump scare of Bloodborne, the wheelchair gunner. This guy comes up later, so keep him in mind. Moving on, you'll get your first shortcut, all the way back to the first lantern. This is when most people will fight the cleric beast, but I'll cover bosses later. You run into the sewers, crawling with annoyingly fast enemies. Crows, rats, those weird crawly guys. This area is more annoying than difficult. The introduction to the boar is pretty good though, just a simple introduction to one big enemy. It probably would have been better if it wasn't in a tight hallway, but I digress. The shortcut back to the first lantern again from before the bridge ties things together really nicely. Shortcuts like this persist through the game, so I won't be mentioning them much anymore. The bridge is horrible. There are a ton of enemies on the bridge, stretching all the way across, so good luck getting by without getting hit. When the two at the other end of the bridge push the flaming ball seems almost random. Luckily, that's pretty easy to dodge, and might kill some of the enemies you haven't yet. The ogre combined with the faster enemies is a good way to introduce the concept of groups with big enemies, but it's just annoying when it's right before a boss. You can sprint through, but it's still really annoying. Your first visit to the cathedral ward is nothing special. You have to do a bit of exploring. You'll probably see your first church giant. The one with the ball and chain is really annoying, but it's really just to connect to Old Gehrman. Old Gehrman is also completely skippable, which I love. It costs 10,000 blood echoes, this game's versions of souls, to do so. This is a great compromise. Chances are, if you don't want to do Old Gehrman and the blood-starved beast, you already know what's down there, and you can play the game without those 10,000 echoes or the ones gained from said beast. If you do decide to go through Old Gehrman though, you're gonna have to go through quite the ordeal. It's fine up until the second bridge, where some random hunter on the tower starts shooting you with a Gatling gun. This wouldn't be a huge issue if there were ample cover, but there just isn't. On top of that, you're constantly getting attacked by fast enemies, at one point including another hunter. You could be poisoned by some of those enemies. After Old Gehrman, you return to the cathedral ward and actually go through the level. The top of the tower is actually pretty fun to get to. There are gunners mixed with normal enemies, but nothing tries to ambush you, and you can tell what's going on. It's a fast-paced, frantic fight to the death. Descending the tower, on the other hand, sucks. Platforming, and a FromSoft Souls-like. Why, Miyazaki? Getting down this is so confusing, and figuring out which drops you'll survive is trial and error, especially if you want to get to the secret door. The door is worth it though. The Source of the Dream is a really cool area, and there's a lantern in there. The rest of the ward is fighting fast enemies in a thin corridor that's really easy to get cornered in, so that's fun. Then fighting slower enemies in a more open space. That's really all there is to it. You're likely to go to Hemwick Charnel Lane next, which is really just an excuse to bombard you with a ton of annoyingly fast enemies before an easy boss, and there's really nothing of note here, so I'll just skip over it until we get to the Witch of Hemwick. Witches? The Forbidden Woods is by far my favorite area in the game. There are no unfair ambushes, it is a secret path to earlier in the game, giving great world permanence, and it's fun to learn and navigate. I love how maze-like it is. There are traps, but you can react to them if you're quick enough. Unless you fall, I guess, but there's always a pretty easy way back up. The snake men are really strong, but they're usually either alone or only accompanied by pests that can be taken out in tandem in a fun way. The biggest problem I have with this area is the long boss run, but that wouldn't be too much of a problem if it weren't for the specific boss here, but I'll get to that in time. After going back to Iosefka's clinic, through the secret path, you can grab an item that lets you go to Cainhurst Castle. The Cainhurst Castle is a fun area, but there are few too many ghosts. The ghosts are easy to deal with though. It's also pretty fun to find your way through, especially figuring out where you can get on the roof. The gargoyles are fine enough, and the blow dart guys aren't too annoying, except for when they're standing right next to a ladder and knock you down right before you get to the top. Screw that one. I didn't even bother with going outside, so the beasts with bellies full of blood never bothered me. The area is one of the prettiest ones, but I'm partial to snowy areas. Not sure why, I don't actually like snow, but snow is pretty. It's still a little too gray though, even with the wood. Bergenworth is small, but there's some annoying stuff to it. I do like how it introduces the bug things. It gives you one semi-ambush, then two that are kinda separate, and two more right next to each other, with another ranged enemy. Inside the building, there's a hunter in the worst spot possible. It's in a tight, twisty little corner. The main problem is that their attacks specifically go really far forward. You can't really dodge into them without getting hit. I just summon Damien and destroy them. I've already voiced my transgressions with Yahar'gul, but let me reiterate and elaborate on the first area of the post-ROM Yahar'gul. There are a ton of fast, annoying enemies here, all over the place. Plus they respawn infinitely until you kill the Bellringers, which is just a more annoying scenario of the gunners from before, where you need to run to the thick of the fight. The dogs here have way too much health. The Amygdala trying to grab you and shooting lasers is really cool though. We're going to stray from the main path to the Upper Cathedral Ward real quick. I hate the Upper Cathedral Ward. The 5 werewolves are way too much, especially in the pitch black. The brainsuckers are very annoying enemies. I'm fine with them taking insight, that's not a big deal. I don't care that they do a ton of damage. I'm even fine with how much health they have. My problem with them is that every time you get hit, you have to wait for so long until you can move again. Then you're stuck in a standing animation until you finally stand all the way back up, but you don't have iframes in that animation, meaning you can be grabbed again with no way to avoid it. The bosses here are fine though, we'll get to that later. The lecture hall is literally just a pathway to the Nightmare Frontier and the Nightmare of Mincis. You can meet Patches here, but that's about it. Why is there a church giant here though? How did it get in? It's so big. I guess it's a dream though, so whatever. The Nightmare Frontier is an optional area through the door on the far side of the bottom floor of the lecture hall. This is an annoying area, but at least it's optional. There are rock trolls, silver beasts, and weird poison worms? Oh, and it's all in a poison swamp. It's pretty easy to run through, and the shortcut to the boss is short, so it's not all bad. If you do want to get all the stuff here, especially without a bold hunter's marker dying, good luck. You're more determined than I am, that's for sure. The Nightmare of Mincis is the final area of the main game. This area is a very mixed bag. The winter lanterns are incredibly annoying, and if they grab you, you're instantly dead. That constant frenzy is frustrating, but enemies are susceptible to it, so it's actually kind of fun to try and knock them into the frenzy areas. I do wish it was a little more obvious what was causing the frenzy though. The spider room is terrifying. I almost have a panic attack running through there every time I do it. I have arachnophobia though, so that's not on the game. If anything, it's good that it's creepy. The run to the elevator before Micolash sucks because of the poison arrows and the chains, but it's not the worst. After Micolash is really fun to explore, and is even the best place to farm for echoes without chalices. The shortcut to Murgo's Wet Nurse is really short, so that's nice. Before jumping into the DLC areas, I want to talk about the Hunter's Dream. It might be my least favorite hub on all the Souls, but it still fits the game pretty well. The music is good, especially the second track, but it's not as good as Firelink Shrine or Amygdala. I might also dislike it because you have to warp from here. That means you have to go through 2 load screens every time you warp, or every time you want the enemies to respawn. You can't rest at the lanterns. You can't level at the lanterns. Literally the only thing you can do with the lanterns is travel to the dream. I do like the doll. At first I wasn't too fond of her, but as I played, she definitely grew on me. I still prefer Shen a lot, but the doll is nice. You reach the DLC by collecting the eye of a blood-drunk hunter next to the doll in the Hunter's Dream after Vicar Amelia. The Hunter's Nightmare is the first area of the DLC. It's kind of odd given that it's just Gehrman but changed. The hunters being normal enemies makes this area way harder than pretty much any other area in the whole game, especially when you're bombarded by 3 dogs and 2 hunters. There are also those weird tentacle executioner guys. Those guys are hard, but not too annoying. The worst part of the level is entirely optional, and it just contains a bunch of dogs, crows, and hunters. I don't go in there because I don't find it very fun, but it's not offensive. After Ludwig, and just before the clock tower, you face 2 hunters. This may be my least favorite hunter fight in the game. You have one attacking you at range with magic, while the other aggressively attacks you with melee attacks and his gun. The only consistent way I've found to kill these 2 is running behind the altar and killing the melee guy while hoping the magic user doesn't make their way around. Also, pretty sure the melee guy has infinite stamina. Doesn't make sense otherwise. The clock tower comes next. This area is pretty annoying. There are 4 main kinds of enemies here. Weird brain fluid enemies, the same but taller, the church guys, and wheelchair gunners. There are about 500 brain guys in this area, making it incredibly annoying to make your way through, whether you're trying to kill them all or not. The taller brain guys are probably the second most annoying big enemies in the game. The first is pretty obvious if you've played the DLC. If you don't know, I'll give you a hint. Well. Anyway, the tall brain guys do more damage than one of the bosses here. It's faster, smaller, and doesn't stagger as easily as you'd expect, given its frame. The acid bookshelf things are also incredibly annoying. They do way too much damage for what they are. I do like finding my way around the tower though, and seeing how it changes after you push the lever at the top. The final area in the DLC, and the last area we'll be talking about, is the fishing hamlet. As mentioned earlier, the hamlet is my favorite looking area. It's so gross, but it gives me so much nostalgia. I love it. It's like a twisted look back at my childhood. Other than looks though, this area is awful. There are a ton of these weird fish things. They aren't too bad though. They're weak and easy to dodge, despite them throwing their spears sometimes. The fish dogs are about as annoying as normal dogs, with the added bonus of reminding me of Gyo, Tokyo Fish Attack. The curse guys here are really annoying, and the projectiles track a little too well, but they're simple enough to get rid of. Dying. My main grievance with this place lies with the whale things. They're easily the worst big enemy in the entire game. They're fast, have way too much health, have sweeping attacks that outlast your dodge iframes, and come in groups. If you got through a Kuyo without using a Shaman Bone Blade, I have nothing but respect for your skills. There's also a Winter Lantern here or two, so that's kinda weird, but whatever, it's a nightmare. So the areas in this game are all pretty similar. I mostly focused on enemies, but only because it's the biggest difference between them. All the areas are semi-maze-like, and they're really fun to explore, but that's ruined by the sheer amount of enemies. There are exceptions, fun encounters, but they're few and far between. Even some of the more fun encounters, like the bug things, are compromised by really annoying enemies. Even the big enemy next to the bugs have way too much health. This was probably my biggest problem with Bloodborne. It may be worse than Dark Souls 3, but Dark Souls 3 has better things that I'll talk about when I get to that game. Even my favorite area, the Forbidden Woods, has annoying enemies. The giant snake balls, and especially the guys that explode with snakes, have just a little bit too much health. Finally, what I'd consider the crux of this entire series, the bosses. There are times where I just sprint through the game, this one included, just to fight some of the bosses. They're the best part of the series, and give a reason to explore the levels. Everything is simply preparing to fight the bosses. Unfortunately, most of the bosses in this game are really easy, and the few that aren't are ridiculously hard. But that's not going to take away from this game's score in my eyes, since it does feel pretty good to tear through some bosses in a FromSoft Souls-like. The first boss you're likely to face is an optional one, though that's like saying the Taurus Demon is optional. Granted, the Cleric Beast doesn't block any routes, but you'll most likely run into it. This boss is the first of many giant beasts. It's a lot less aggressive than some other beasts, but it's not the least aggressive. It doesn't do much damage, and it has some pretty obvious tells, as well as its limbs breaking pretty fast. On top of this, if you hit its face enough, it will stagger and you can get off a visceral attack, doing a ton of damage. It does have some weird delays, but so do most bosses, so I'd argue that this is just a good tutorial boss. I would anyway if it weren't for one simple thing: the camera. The camera in this fight is awful. Granted, it is in a lot of beast fights, but not all of them. In fact, most of the time it's beneficial to lock on. But in this fight, good luck seeing. There were a couple times during my first playthrough that I died because of the camera, and even now I have to wrestle with it to see. This boss isn't very fun, but it's fine enough tutorial boss, especially if you can get a hold of the camera for long enough to kill it. If you're having trouble with this boss, shoot him in the face until he staggers, do a visceral, and stay behind him until he screeches with a red aura. That signifies that his face has been regenerated. Rinse and repeat. It gets more aggressive as the fight goes on, a theme that continues, so watch out. Before moving to the next boss, one huge complaint I have with the entire rest of the game: the enemies' animations are atrocious. The hunters are pretty good, they feel weighty, and they give a good game feel, but the enemies are not good. Most animations for attacks are extremely similar, and if it's not similar to another animation, it's not obviously an attack animation. Take for instance the slams and the grab attacks of the Cleric Beast. They both start with the beast raising up its bigger arm, and, with different timings, that's the important part, bringing the arm down to do an attack. This wouldn't be much of an issue if all attacks had the same timing. In that case, you could just dodge at the same time. But if they come at different times, you'll have no idea when to dodge. This means the only time you have to dodge is when the actual attack part comes. And that's just not enough time to accurately dodge all attacks. This wouldn't be much of a problem if being slow and methodical is part of the game. That way, getting out of the way of both attack hitboxes would be an optimal choice. But in Bloodborne, most of the time you're going to want to be aggressive. This means dodging instead of running, plus no shields. As for the other problem, take the tiny swipe attack the beast does with its smaller arm. The arm is moved extremely slightly, then swings fast in the opposite direction. It does this exact arm movement all the time when it's just walking. This just makes the game frustrating to play at times, even if it doesn't ruin the game as a whole. Next up is the first required boss, Father Gascoigne. He's called Father because he's part of the Healing Church, or was, I suppose. This is the first boss you can properly parry, and you probably should if you want to beat him without cheese. He's fast, frantic, and uses the same moves as you. He has a blunderbuss though, the inferior choice, so he's not too difficult. That's fitting given that he's the first required boss. This boss also coaxes you rather firmly out of the gameplay loop of Dark Souls into the more aggressive play of Bloodborne. A lot of his attacks have large windups, but small parry windows, leading to an odd parrying experience, especially compared to the ogres. After you take about a third of his health, he transforms his Hunter Axe, which has pros and cons. It changes his moveset, so you need to learn more, and it gives him a longer range, but he can no longer shoot you. After 2/3 of his health, he transforms into a beast. This makes him much faster and far more aggressive. His moveset also completely changes again, and he's pretty hard to parry in this phase, but it's definitely possible. If you need tips for Gascoigne, first of all, learn to parry him. This is very important for him and for the rest of the game. If you just can't get the parry down, you can cheese him by using a charged R2 with a transformed Hunter's Axe behind the gravestones until he transforms his weapon. Then just be aggressive. Get up in his face, charge into him, all that jazz. Attack him as much as you can while he's transforming. His AoE doesn't actually hurt you. There is a way to cheese him by getting him stuck on the stairs, but I don't know how to do it. Gascoigne puts you in the Bloodborne playstyle rather well. I do prefer the Dark Souls playstyle, but as a tutorial, this boss is really good, and pretty fun if you're in the mood for fast-paced combat. The Blood-Starved Beast is the only boss in the entire main game that gave me any true trouble. It was like bashing my head against a brick wall until it shattered, and it didn't rebuild itself in subsequent playthroughs. This was the boss that made me learn how to Bloodborne, mostly because I cheesed through Gascoigne. That being said, I hate this boss, which sucks because it's almost fun. First of all, it's way too erratic. It has a charge attack that carries it across almost the entirety of the arena, usually far past you. Then, when you do finally reach it, it usually jumps just out of reach before jumping at you with a combo that can easily kill you. Honestly, that's not too much of a problem, given that the combo can be parried pretty easily, and its non-combo attacks are really easy to parry. The charge-esque attack is annoying, but it's nothing horrible. My first big problem with this boss is its instant kill grab attack. This looks almost identical to the start of its combo. It will only kill you after it gains poison, but it is still an instant kill. I will grant that it does look distinct from the combo, but not enough in my opinion, especially with its weird skin flaps. Even having an instant kill attack this early is worth reconsidering. Its aggression increases as the fight goes on, but even considering that, it's entirely random how aggressive it is. Speaking of the poison though, this is what really seals this boss as potentially the worst designed in the game. Constantly getting poisoned when you're near him sends a message. You can either stay back, be careful of not getting poisoned, and pick your attack opportunities, or you can be aggressive and, oh no, I'm poisoned, kill him quick! The only problem with this is that one of those isn't true. You have to be aggressive 99% of the time in this game. The only tip I can really give you when it comes to this fight is learn to parry him. It's really important. Oh, and bring some antidotes, and don't get grabbed. I've heard horror stories of people getting stuck on Vicar Amelia for hours on end, but I never fell to such a fate. Actually, I found Amelia to be pretty easily, especially after the Blood-Starved Beast. Amelia is one of the easiest main game bosses for me, and I'm not really sure why. If you just stand behind her, only one of her attacks can hit you, and even then, that attack is pretty well telegraphed. Most of her attacks consist of her flailing around, pretty similar to the Cleric Beast actually. I do find Amelia easier than the Cleric Beast though. Her attacks seem easier to read for whatever reason. It might be because her arms actually bend and aren't almost straight the entire time, but I'm typing that while looking at neither boss, so it might just be completely wrong. Either way, this boss isn't very fun. His attacks are easy to dodge. The fur, clothing, whatever that is flailing around presents the same problem as the Blood-Starved Beast's flayed back skin, not black skin, back skin. But it's less of a problem here, given how easy she is to read. At one point during the fight, she'll start healing, but it's pretty easy to outpace the healing, given the area just before gives you a ton of upgrade material, and it's entirely possible to kill her before she even has the chance to heal. If you're having trouble with this boss, which seems pretty common from what I've heard, all you have to do is stand behind her, wail on her back left leg. As her attack that hits behind her is a sweep on the right, stagger her, visceral. When she heals, stagger again, rinse and repeat. Once she starts healing, just smack her a bunch. She'll restore some health, but it shouldn't be too much. It's assuming she's even able to heal in the first place, though. The Witches of Hemwick are the easiest boss in the game, bar none. They look threatening with their eye cloaks, but they're all bark and no bite. First, one mad one is summoned, the weird guys with the scythe. The witch is sitting in one of the corners, invisible. After attacking her enough, a second mad one is summoned, along with a second health bar popping up. If you don't kill the second one fast enough, the first one will be revived, and a third mad one will be summoned. Sometimes one of the witches will do an AoE, but that's really rare. That's all there is to this fight. You don't even need to kill the mad ones. If you really need help with this boss, ignore the mad ones, just go for the witches. After getting the first witch to around half health, try to find the other one. You'll know it's the other one because one health bar won't go down when you attack it. Kill them while trying to keep their health bar around the same level. If you still die, cost help your soul, you can just get rid of all your insight, whether by buying stuff or summoning. And no mad ones will spawn at all. You can do Dark Beast Parl later, but most guides I've seen do it now. I hate Parl. He's gross and lanky and his attacks are annoying. He jumps around way too much, and his AoE is just a little too big. He can swipe at you. Later his swipes will send out electric charges. He can do a leap, a slam, a big AoE, and electric breath. These wouldn't be all too bad if he wasn't constantly leaping on you, slamming, then jumping away. If you're locked on, good luck telling what's happening. The camera goes everywhere. If you're not though, good luck finding where the beast is. His attacks are hard to read, his AoE is annoying to dodge, and he's constantly moving away. He's not my least favorite boss, but he's close. All you need to do for this fight is attack his legs and make him stagger. But again, good luck with that. If his chest glows, get away fast. He's gonna do an AoE. If his head glows, attack his feet. He's about to do his electric breath. Also, just wait and do this fight later. It'll serve you well. My least favorite boss is next, which sucks because it's right after my favorite area. It's just the gank squad from Dark Souls 2, but with some different tricks up their sleeves. The most aggressive shadow just has a katana. It'll slash at you and that's about it. The one with the flame sprayer is always right next to him. This guy is probably the most annoying. They constantly jump away when you're trying to attack them. It's not quite as aggressive as the other one, which means attacking it is more difficult, while the katana one is still alive. Finally, the last one shoots fireballs at you from a distance the entire time. If you do happen to get close, it'll attack you with a tonitrus, but it's not electrified, so it's not too bad. This one is the least annoying on its own, but along with the other two, it just makes it hell to attack them without getting hit by fire. Once you get one of them down to around a third of its health, snakes will burst out of them, and they all gain new attacks. The katana one gets a couple ridiculously long-reaching attacks, the flame sprayer gets a similar attack, and the fireball shooter gets exploding arcing fireballs. Once one of them is completely dead, snakes that come up out of the ground will be summoned, and they're probably the most annoying part of the fight. This boss is more annoying than hard, but I do still die to it more often than not. If you're having trouble with this fight, get them all down to around half health, then wail on the Katana Man. They'll be stunned for a second while snakes are bursting out of them, so kill the Katana one as quickly as possible. Next, take out the fireball thrower. The flame sprayer is really annoying, he jumps all over the place, so just try to corner him and stun him to death. Or you can just go out of bounds and kill them with no opposition. My favorite boss in the entire game, including DLC, is at the top of Cainhurst Castle. Martyr Logarius, it's a fun name to say, is really fun, assuming he actually acts like he should. It's pretty random if you're gonna have fun or not. He has two phases. In the first phase he tries to stay away from you while casting magic at you that looks strikingly similar to the weird tree-wielding things in Dark Souls 3. He will continuously jump away when you get close, leaving skulls in his wake that he can make explode. He will always make the skull explode after jumping back before he attacks again, except for that one time he didn't. He can cast a giant ranged orb and a ton of small skulls at you as well. Sometimes, very rarely, he'll use melee attacks in this phase. In the second phase he becomes far more aggressive. He pulls out a sword and starts jumping at you, swinging wildly. He rarely uses range attacks in this phase, but he can cast a spell that causes infinite swords to rain from the sky. These swords are really annoying and probably the worst part of the fight. You can stop them by breaking the sword he plants in the ground, but sometimes he just spams this single attack over and over. It's super frustrating when that happens. In the first phase, your best bet is to try to push him up against a pillar and get up in his face. And try to get him to use the melee attacks and parry for a visceral attack. Be very careful of his instant exploding orb. Your only hope is to dodge right when he casts it, but it's a weird tell. Stay away from the stationary skulls and run around him if he's casting the giant orb, trying to get a backstab. Dodge forward through the mini skulls. In the second phase, dodge into his jumps, preferably behind him, and parry all his other melee attacks. If you can get the parries down, Logarius goes down fast. Otherwise, get ready for a world of hurt. His inconsistency highlights one of my biggest problems with Bloodborne. Every boss has this to a degree, damn near every enemy too. Sometimes you'll be having a ton of fun, other times Martyr Logarius will spam skulls at you. Also, he can plant the sword that does the sword falling thing in a pillar and you're just kind of screwed. Also, him being my favorite boss is kind of indicative of the quality of this game, because yeah, most of the time he's super fun, but also sometimes he can spam one move over and over and you'll just be screwed, there's nothing you can do, and that permeates through the rest of the game. It's really frustrating. Rom the vacuous spider is a weird slug spider thing. Rom's fight is pretty simple. You plunge into a lake, attack a docile Rom, then she spawns a bunch of lesser spiders. The spiders are really simple enemies, they only have like 4 attacks, but having 10 of them on you at once can be overwhelming. They can do a high jumping dive, a flailing charge, a lower jump, and a simple slash. Their heads will also take significantly reduced damage. Rom is the same, hitting her head will deal almost no damage. After dealing enough damage to Rom herself, she will teleport away and spawn more spiders. Keep in mind the spiders already on the field won't go away. After teleporting, she starts attacking as well. She can rear up and send projectiles from the sky your way, flip over and send projectiles out of the ground all around, raise her head and tail, and do an AoE, and flail around, hurting you with every touch. The difficulty of this fight comes from managing multiple foes and not getting surrounded, but because of the way it's done, I find it less frustrating, like the shadows, and more like a puzzle. I personally enjoy the Rom fight, but I can see disliking it. Tips for Rom. Kill all the spiders before attacking her. In her second phase, make sure to always keep an eye on her. If she does anything other than rear up, get away from her. If she does rear, start running and the projectiles won't hit you. She's more aggressive in the third phase after teleporting the second time, but no more spiders will spawn, and she won't teleport anymore, so just take your time from then on. Reading her flailing is annoying, so just pick your attack opportunities carefully. Because she doesn't have any limbs, her flailing doesn't really have an animation tied to it other than the flailing, which is a huge problem. But other than that, as long as you don't stay up on her constantly, Rom isn't too bad. Oh boy, a corpse pile being birthed by the moon, my favorite. The one reborn is gross, and actually looks like an amalgamation of bodies, unlike the rotten, who just kinda looks like a couple polygons. The one reborn is pretty annoying if you don't know what you're doing. He causes bodies to rain down directly above you, and if you don't see them coming, they can kill you very quickly. He also has an AoE and a ranged magic attack. You can avoid these pretty easily if you notice the light. Every now and then he can also spit acid that fills the lowest level of the arena. This chews through your health and can very quickly destroy you if you don't get out of the middle of the arena. If you're up on the stairs, he can shoot bodies at you, as well as propping himself up and smacking you. These are both pretty easy to dodge, and he rarely props himself up. There are 6 casters in the arena up the stairs who can shoot magic at you and who can heal the one. This boss is really annoying, especially when its legs start flailing while you're trying to hit the bottom portion of it. I was really annoyed the first time I fought this boss, as I didn't know how to tell the falling bodies were coming, but now I actually kinda like it. If you're struggling, first and foremost take out all 6 casters. Make sure to hit them to the side so that they don't fall. They're far more annoying when you need to deal with them on the one's level. After they're dead, wait for the one to reach the wall under one of the openings where the casters were. Apply some fire paper if you have it and do a plunging attack. If you hit the head, you'll do extra damage. If you hit the head and the body, you'll do a ton of damage. From here, start hitting the bottom portion of it. If you notice a red glow directly above you, roll and dodge the bodies. If the head glows, get away, that's the AoE. If the back glows, he's about to do a large cast. Do not get hit by this. The acid is probably the biggest threat, but it's pretty rare, thankfully. Once he staggers, start smacking him in the face. If you do enough damage, he'll re-stagger. That much should be pretty easy. From here, start hitting his back, following the same strategy. His legs will be far more active at this point, and you won't be able to do much damage to him. When he staggers while you're hitting the back, don't bother hitting him in the face. You can't get around fast enough. Instead, just keep wailing on his back, and he should go down without too much trouble. This boss is another great example of horrible, absolutely atrocious animations. Granted, that's mostly due to its body shape, but you get the idea. Before moving on to the nightmare, let's head up to the upper cathedral ward. I don't like this area and usually come back later, but I'll talk about the celestial emissary now. They're super easy and barely put up a fight. They're just normal enemies. And the one that doesn't chase you has the boss health bar. After about half of its health is gone, it'll grow, and that's about it. At a quarter health, it'll grow tentacles, but it'll be dead long before it can cast any magic. If there were other tentacle alien things instead of just the melee ones, this boss might actually be hard, but as it stands, this boss is way too easy. If you need a strategy, how did you get this far in the game? All you need to do is kite away all the non-boss enemies, as the boss doesn't chase you, then run in and kill the main guy as quickly as possible. If it's really an issue, you can kite them away again after the main one grows. Overall, this is just a disappointment, and a precursor to the true boss of the area. Getting to the next boss is really esoteric, and is based on some Lovecraft novel. You have to hit the window of the arena of the celestial emissary to find Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos. I don't know the lore for her very well, but I know she's important. She's designed beautifully, but in the most grotesque way possible. It's hard to tell what you're even looking at most of the time, and I love it. She's vaguely humanoid, but she's also not at all. I really can't accurately describe how she looks, but she's probably my favorite looking boss. She's also probably the hardest main game boss, at least the hardest without BS, like the gankiness of the shadows. She has quite a few attacks, but most of them consist of flailing her tentacles. She can also spit blood at you, and she can summon space lasers. I never saw the space lasers, but they exist. The easiest way to beat this boss that I know of is to stand behind her to the side and just start hitting her. Most of her attacks are easy to avoid here, so there's really no worries, but you do still need to be vigilant, because good luck staying here. Also, if you're standing in front of her, she has a charge attack, and it's really confusing to dodge. I don't exactly mind the difficulty of reading the tells of Ebrietas just because of how she's designed. It's oddly fitting. In the Nightmare Frontier, a place that took me far too long to find, you'll find Amygdala. It's one of the giant things you see on the buildings in Yargul. These things are really gross, especially their heads. The 6 arms, and the holes on the face, and the holes in the hands are really unnerving. Amygdala has a lot of thrashing attacks, as well as a laser, a jump, and a stomp. The stomp only happens if you're directly under it. The jump is the same, but it's less common in the first phase. Speaking of phases, eventually it rips off 2 of its arms, taking a cue from the last giant, and becomes far more aggressive. If you're too far away, it'll just shoot you with a laser, and then the ground will explode with a laser hit. All the swiping attacks hit in front of it, so you'd seemingly want to be behind it, but its legs and tail take way less damage than its arms and head, so you want to get up in its attacks and be more aggressive with dodging than running. For a giant beast fight, this one is pretty good. The weak points give this fight a unique dynamic. As for strategy, you can just stand directly under it, turn towards its tail as it jumps, then charge an attack and smack it in the face. Once you understand this strategy, you'll never get hit by the jump again, and it's unlikely to do anything other than the stomp, which is relatively easy to dodge. If it didn't have that cheese, this would be one of the best bosses in the game, but as it stands, all it really has going for it is an easily exploitable weak point. Micolash is barely a boss. He's more of a lore dump than anything. He's literally just a guy with a cage on his head, which isn't unique at all in this game. All you do is chase him through hallways and then have a pretty easy one-on-one. The puppet enemies here are nothing special. They don't have much health, they're slow, and they only have a couple attacks. Micolash himself only runs until 2 specific rooms. In the first, all he can do is the weird tentacle arcane attack. In the second room, he cuts you off with a gate and you have to drop in on him. He gains a slap attack that does essentially nothing, and an arcane explosion that can kill you very quickly, potentially one-shotting you if you get caught wrong. He also constantly says random lore stuff, like talking with Kos and eyes. In the first room, all you have to do is get him in a corner, hit him a few times, dash back, and then go back in. In the second room, don't drop down. Instead, stay up top and throw a poison knife at him. It takes some careful positioning, but it's possible. If you don't have knives, shoot him and run back down to the gate. Just attack him through the gate and back up if he tries to attack you. It makes the fight a hell of a lot less annoying. The final required boss in the game is Murgo's Wet Nurse. This boss is disappointingly easy. All you have to do is stand behind it and attack. It has a diagonal slash, a 3-step slam, and a wild slashing attack. It might have more, but I never noticed them, and it doesn't really matter. Eventually, it'll fill the arena with fog and spawn a clone jumping out at you. You can literally just run in circles to avoid everything. The witches get a pass in difficulty because they're more of a puzzle in the early game. Celestial Emissary is the same, plus they precede a much harder boss. Murgo's Wet Nurse is potentially the final boss of the game, and it poses no threat. The first time I beat the boss, and it hung after the health bar depleted, I was freaking out because I thought it was too easy and I was super ready for a second phase, but nothing happened. I was just kind of underwhelmed. I didn't even run during the fog phase, I didn't see the clone. It's not even after a difficult area, there's just nothing to this boss. At least it looks kinda weird, but even then, that doesn't make up for the ease of the boss. Speaking of looking, if you like the designs of the bosses and want to look more into it, go watch TV Skyen's Boss Designs of Bloodborne series. It's great. I will also say that the animations for this boss are pretty good. This genuinely would have been a great tutorial boss if it was scaled for early game. If you do need help with this boss, just stay behind it and run in circles while the fog is in the arena. That's about all there is to it. Now, if at half health the purple fog just kinda stayed, the boss would probably be super fun, but unfortunately, the boss remains disappointing. Before the final bosses, I'll go into the DLC. The first boss of the DLC is Ludwig, a giant horse thing. His second eye head is gross, I love it. Ludwig is one of the better bosses in the game, and one of the hardest. In his first phase, he jumps around all over the place. He almost always starts off by jumping directly at you, and has a bunch of different flails and combos, all differentiated by different starting animations. In fact, he has so many that it's hard to keep track of. He also has 3 jump attacks, one where he jumps towards you, one where he jumps completely off screen and comes down a second later, and one where he jumps off screen, then stays off screen for a few seconds, presumably on the ceiling. He also has a charge attack that is signified by him blowing something out of his mouth, kinda looks like dirt. This can one-shot you if you take counter damage, which I really don't like, and its tracking is kinda ridiculous. The charge is oddly difficult to dodge, and I'm not sure why. If you're too far away, he can also breathe magic on you? Arcane, I guess? It's kinda hard to tell what it is. In the second phase, he stands up and wields the Holy Moonlight Blade, a sword that's been in every FromSoft game since Kingsfield. He swings the sword around with terrifying speed for something of his stature. He has slashes, stabs, and a few magic attacks. From a distance he can shoot diagonal blade beams at you, and if you're up close he has 2 AoEs, one of which he holds his sword up for, does a very weak AoE, then does an incredibly powerful magic attack that spans the entire arena in front of him. For the other, he holds his sword with the blade pointed down, and does a very powerful AoE. The only time I've died in the second phase was when I thought I could kill him before a downward AoE. Suffice to say, that wasn't true. The greed killed me, as it has many others. If you need strategy, be aggressive. If he's jumping, learn the dodge timing. If he's flailing, get in as soon as you can. Stagger him as quickly as possible. If he's breathing, dodge and attack his head. For the second phase, same thing. A lot of his attacks actually can't hurt you while you're right next to him, and the ones that can are easily dodged by just dodging into the swing. For the upward AoE, keep attacking through it, and just make sure to dodge the big magic attack afterward. That will kill you fast. Also, don't get hit by the downward AoE at all. That's not a good time. Also, don't get caught in the corner. This can happen in literally any boss, but it's particularly annoying on Ludwig when he's almost dead. There's a boss I would consider optional even within the DLC. That boss would be Laurence the First Vicar. To fight Laurence, you need to get up on the altar elevator, make it go up, then jump off and wait for the bottom to reach you. Here you will find his skull, and he will become active in the Nightmare's Grand Cathedral. Laurence is the worst boss in the entire game, and he's literally just a cleric beast put on fire. Same attacks, just with fire. As the fight goes on, Laurence gets more and more aggressive. His damage also increases, I think. Even the wiki says he deals absurd amounts of damage. The fire also lasts way too long, and the fire AoEs have way too large a hitbox. Some of his attacks can even turn him around 180 degrees, not including the ones that are supposed to do that, and the ones that are 360 degrees. Basically, the only way to get through this part of the fight is whittle him down little by little. This is not fun, not in the least. This isn't even fun in Dark Souls, a game much slower than Bloodborne that focuses far more on strategy than speed. Probably because of the shields. I also did a spiel of this boss specifically on Discord, link in the description. Here is that spiel. Alright, so Laurence might be worse than the one reborn. At least the one reborn is consistent. It seems like the cleric beast with fire, ignoring the second phase for now, which has its own problems, but the attacks are so inconsistent. First of all, his quick attacks with a small hand are dumb. Sometimes they just do a bit of damage, nothing that'll kill you too quick. Other times they'll kill you in a hit and a half with 35 vitality. Why? Why can't this game get fair damage numbers right? A full hit plus AoE damage with a huge wind-up from his big hand does less damage than a fast love tap with almost no wind-up. On top of that, the second phase is just dumb. Sometimes he's just surrounded by lava so you can't get near him. So he spews lava because you're too far away, meaning you can't get near him, so he spews lava because you're far away, and so on. As alluded to in the spiel, just under 50% health, Laurence's legs will explode, and he'll start crawling around. Now he leaves lava wherever he crawls that lingers, and he can spit lava. He still flails around too. At this point, the fight gets more fun, but it's still annoying, because if you die, you have to start over completely, so you don't want to be too reckless. As for strategy, as I said, get out while he's attacking, duck in, hit, and get back out. For the second phase, get on his side and try to stay there and attack as much as possible. Remember, the hitboxes are annoying, and the amount of damage is dumb. Most of his attacks can quickly kill you if you don't have insane vitality, and counter damage sucks. Alright, we're almost done. We'll need 4 pages of the script left. The living failures, you know, you would think so close to the end that I would screw up the script less. I can't even talk normally. What's wrong with me? Anyway, back to talking about Bloodborne. The living failures are by far the easiest boss in the DLC, but not until you know how they work. They look like the celestial emissary with collapsed heads. It took a while for me to understand how to fight them, but I eventually got it down. 2 of them will be casting magic, and the other 2 will be using melee attacks and rushing you down. Every time you kill one, another takes its place, meaning there are always 4 failures in the arena. The 2 doing the actions will swap, so don't count on the caster always being the caster, but you can get some pretty easy damage if you pay attention to which one's doing what. The melee guys have swipes, a rushdown, and a head slam. There's really nothing special about them, other than the amount of damage that they do, but it's honestly not too bad. The casters can do what is essentially emit force from Dark Souls, or they can shoot a few small projectiles in a row. The arena is actually pretty important in this fight, as it adds a layer of strategy when it comes to positioning relative to the casters. Every now and then, all of them will raise their heads and rain the cosmos down upon your head. I actually really like this fight. It's fun and takes strategy, despite it being a gank. I found that parrying a charging failure is rather easy, and it allows for a huge chunk of damage. Other than that, simply run around attacking the casters at close range so they can't hit you, while not letting the melee ones catch up to you. When they start bringing down the cosmos, just stand on the side of the giant sunflower opposite where the projectiles are coming from, and they can't hit you. Feel free to do some damage if one of them happens to be on the correct side for that. Just be warned that they might start attacking before the giant attack is done. Lady Maria is my favorite DLC fight, bar none. She's an aggressive, fast hunter wanting nothing more than to take you down. She was Gehrman's first student, and she swore not to use the blood arts she uses in the second and third phases ever again. Those two are completely disconnected, I just want to bring them both up. The fact that she uses combat techniques she swore to never use again just to beat you really ups the ante in this fight. She really doesn't want you finding the fishing hamlet. In the first phase, it's pretty similar to just a normal hunter battle, just really easy to parry, but after a third of her health is gone, she'll stab herself through the chest and enhance her blades with her blood. She'll do a huge AoE while this happens as well. This gives her far more reach and damage, as well as adding a couple of very long-range attacks to her arsenal that need to be dodged. After another third, she'll stab herself again, raise into the air, and do another huge AoE. The blood-soaked blades now leave behind trails of fire, making dodging harder, and increasing damage dealt. There were a couple times in this phase where I'd parry, but the fire after trail would still hit me, so I wasn't able to do a visceral. Other than that, personally I actually found this fight pretty easy. You just need to parry her as much as possible, then learn dodge timings for unparryable attacks, and, well, don't get hit. Easier said than done, I suppose, but I really don't know what else advice to give. Just get good. By far the hardest boss in the entire anthology of FromSoft, for me personally anyway, is an orphaned newborn. I don't think anthology technically works in this context, but shh. The Orphan of Kos is ridiculous. It took me easily 50 tries in my first playthrough. This fight is gross, really gross. You see the orphan crawling out from Kos's corpse, presumably just birth, with flesh falling off of it. It then proceeds to use a placenta as a weapon. By far the grossest looking boss in the game, if not the series. I enjoy this boss fight, but not as much as I wish I did. It was the only boss that I almost skipped. I wanted to skip Laurence, but I didn't almost actually skip him. The Orphan was that, unfortunately. The first phase is pretty fun. There are some weird attacks with weird parry timing, but overall it's fine. I'm going to cover all the attacks I remember from my 50 plus fights with him. He has a right-handed slash that's really easy to parry, a left-handed slash that leads into a combo, also easy to parry, a left-handed swing with this cord that has different parry times but the extremely similar animation. He can jump away and swing his placenta down at you. He can jump at you. He has a very powerful downward swing with a super long windup, an AoE attack where he plucks a placenta ball and crouches into the ground, and another move where he plucks a placenta ball and throws it at you. He also has a move where he screeches, then swings his placenta in a huge circle. He's extremely fast, comboing moves together and launching into other combos. You can still get a backstab during the AoE and the jump though if you're positioned right. The second phase is much more erratic though. He goes all over the place. He jumps more often and his moves combo more and he attacks and recovers faster. I've never gotten the visceral in this phase, and I'm not sure that you can. He has a crazy flail, a couple of jumping attacks, one where he jumps away and throws placenta balls at you, normal placenta throwing attacks, and he can even call down lightning that continues as a shockwave of lightning. I do feel kinda bad for killing it, it's literally a newborn, but also, in killing it, you free it from the nightmare, so maybe it's a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't kill it and just let it suffer. Anyway, I never thought I'd say placenta so many times. Strategy time. Parry every attack that you can, stand close, and be aggressive. Match its aggression and you'll be rewarded. When he does the scream and swing, get in and backstab him. Same with the jump, dash behind him and backstab. Same with the AoE too. Same goes for the second phase, stay on him and be aggressive. When he screams, watch for the lightning in the middle of the shore. Other than that, just stay on him and hope you can dodge through all the placenta ball mist. Gross. Finally, we're getting to, fittingly, the final bosses. The final boss before the secret final boss, Gehrman, is oddly simple. He's just kind of a hunter fight in the first phase, then adds a couple other attacks like air slashing and an AoE in the second phase. He has his gun, and does plenty of slashes, sure, but he doesn't feel very final. Of course, the lore makes it feel pretty final, but the boss itself is just really easy and almost boring. Like an easier Logarius or something, with a hint of Lady Maria, and then Celestial Emissary for the easiness. Not to say it's as easy as the Emissary, just the other bosses combined with the Emissary. You get it. Actually, he's not too dissimilar to Father Gascoigne. He's fast, aggressive, with a trick weapon and a gun. He does have some pretty crazy attacks in the second phase, but he doesn't turn into a beast or anything. His AoE, as far as I know, is the second largest in the game, only beaten out by the next and truly final boss, though that's arguable as the final boss's AoE is completely unavoidable and simply brings you to 1 HP, but I'll get to that I guess. Honestly, there's not much when it comes to strategy with Gehrman. Nothing more than being aggressive and parrying. If you've made it this far, you can do at least that much. He's not the easiest boss in the game, but he's certainly not the final boss by any means, in terms of difficulty, even though he can be one of the final bosses if you don't eat the umbilical cords. Is it eating? Anyway, the secret final boss of the game is caused to spawn by consuming, or using, I guess, using the terminology of the menus, 3/3 of an umbilical cord. So I guess the whole umbilical cord. Anyway, as gross as that is, this boss really isn't anything special. It's not as hard as, or as gross as the Orphan, it's not as fun as Lady Maria, not as aggressive as any of them, it doesn't hold the spectacle of the one reborn, no interesting mechanic like the Emissary. In fact, the Moon Presence is arguably one of the easiest bosses in the game. I know I've said that a few times, but hear me out. You have to be at the end of the game for this fight, you have to have beaten many harder bosses, you can go to the witches super early, the Emissary can be taken out at any point after Rom, and Murgo's Wet Nurse at least has the clone phase. The Moon Presence isn't aggressive, its hitboxes are tiny, which is arguably a good thing. Its most dangerous move, the AoE, leaves it vulnerable for several seconds, and the blood orbs almost never come close to touching you. All you have to do is be aggressive. There's really nothing beyond that. Most of its moves are easy to read and dodge, and those that aren't don't do any real damage. This boss is incredibly disappointing as a final boss, especially with how esoteric it can be to get some of the umbilical cords. We're finally done with the bosses, and only 13,116 words in. I spent so much time on them because they're my favorite part of all the games, and Bloodborne has just about the weakest selection of bosses, while not doing anything else particularly well. During the boss fights though, something else is going on, something that rarely happens outside of bosses. The music. While I talk about the music, keep in mind that this is all my opinion. I mean the whole review is, but doubly so for the music. My favorite track in the game, by far, is a song that plays while you're fighting the Orphan of Kos, fittingly named Orphan of Kos. This track is definitely a standout within the game, potentially the series. It's intense, tragic, melancholic, sad, and terrifying all at the same time. It perfectly fits the vibe of the fight and sounds good out of context. Notice though that I said this song is a standout. One song I've seen many people say is their favorite is the song that plays while you fight Laurence. It fits with the fight itself, but I don't like the song all that much out of context. It's intense, sure, but it doesn't really hold any of the weight that Laurence himself does. It sounds like a church choir, which is fitting, again, but other than that, there's not much to it. The lyrics are in Latin, but here they are translated. Children, know that if you will abide by the sacred rite with great commitment, there will be a reward through the holy blood. You will be rewarded with the hidden holy blood, or maybe I shall lose my humanity through the holy blood. We honor you with the blood, yet you judge this as blasphemy. You are obsessed with this mystery, and you shall be overcome by bestiality. We honor you with the blood, yet you judge this as blasphemy. We are hindered by this mystery. Water does not achieve success. By the gods, friend. Be afraid by the gods, friend. The blood, be afraid. You are right to. It will be a majestic festivity. By the holy blood, so come, the sweet wine, O defiled juice. This tells of the Holy Church and their use of the blood. They need the blood, though it turns them into beasts. It's tragic, it's intense, it's sad, it's horrifying, but the song is really just kind of intense. It does hold some of the other qualities, but not as much as a song like The Orphan of Kos. It's a good song, the composers of Bloodborne are leagues above what I could ever dream to be, but within the series, it's not exactly a highlight, which is a shame because I usually fight these two bosses back to back. There's kind of a theme with this that I've alluded to once or twice and outright stated at one point. This game is very inconsistent, and that's a big problem. It's inconsistent with difficulty, leading to the ease of bosses like Margot's Wet Nurse, the Moon Presence, the Emissary, and the Witches, contrasted to the difficulty of the Orphan of Kos, Ludwig, Lady Maria, or even Martyr Ligarius. Even the bosses that are mediumly difficult, like Dark Beast Parl, that's a hard name to say, or Father Gascoigne, vary wildly in quality. Gascoigne is fun and difficult for fair reasons, while Parl is only difficult because he flies around the arenas and impossible to keep track of. Gascoigne is a great teaching moment, while the Blood-Starved Beast can send completely the wrong message. I think a recap is in order, given that we've gone through so much. Now let me be very clear in this. This game is amazing. Absolutely incredible. It's just not as good as the other games, in my opinion. There are changes that are worse, in my opinion, such as the build variety, amount of stamina, speed of combat, blood vials, lack of shields, and finite parrying. The difficulty of this game is far less than that of the others, unless you get unlucky and Ligarius decides to plant a sword in the ground 5 times in a row, while with you not being able to attack him because it's an AoE every time. Granted, difficulty isn't really a huge negative, but it diminishes the fun, at least a little, and the inconsistency of it is really annoying. The music is good, sometimes. The lore is really good, better than Sekiro, but much worse than all the others. Again, if you haven't seen it, go watch Vaati's video on the lore. It's only like 30 minutes. I understand why people posit this as their favorite, I just don't share that sentiment. It all comes down to personal preference, and mine just happens to be different when it comes to what most people enjoy so much in this game. Now, finally, let's talk about the Chalice dungeons. These aren't really part of why Bloodborne is my least favorite, despite them being pretty unanimously considered the worst part of the game. They're entirely optional, so I don't hate them all that much. That being said, the Chalice dungeons are kind of a microcosm of all that I don't like about this game. They're inconsistent, though this time it's by nature, as they're randomly generated. They're borderline unfair at times. Take the Defiled Chalice, for instance. They're dull and boring looking. They do exemplify these attributes far worse than the rest of the game, but I think my point still stands. To get 2 of the trophies, you have to create at least 6 chalices, 4 of which are only for materials. They start to drag very quickly and get rather annoying to go through, depending on when in the game you go through them. If you wait too long, the early ones are way too easy. If you go too early, the early ones are almost fun, but the later ones just get way too hard. If you go through them as you'll play, you'll never know when to go into them, but it does aid the repetition a bit. You start in the chalice you get from the Blood-Starved Beast, and get materials from there. You get through each floor. To get through each floor, you simply have to find a lever on each floor, then go to the gate near the beginning. The chalices are pretty similar, with different bosses, until the Defiled Chalice. The Defiled Chalice halves your health when you enter it, making it incredibly annoying to make your way through, especially if you don't have a ridiculous amount of vitality. Aside from that, the Defiled Chalice is pretty normal. The Thumeru Hill, I don't know how to pronounce that, that's close enough, is the final boss of the Thumerian Chalices, Yarnum, Queen of Thumeru. She has quite a bit of lore tied to her. The lore is probably the best part of the chalices, honestly. You then have to go into the Ailing Loran Chalice, which you get from beating Amygdala using Ritual Blood 4, meaning you have to at least reach the 3rd Thumeru Chalice, even just for the weapons trophy. For the last bit of the review, let's do a lightning round of the Chalice bosses with unrelated video footage, because I have already played so much of Bloodborne for this review. The Undead Giant is really annoying. It's just a giant, flailing giant, fittingly. All versions of it. The Merciless Watchers and Chieftain are literally just 3 of the same enemy you see in the dungeon. The Watchdog of the Old Lord sucks, its hitboxes are awful, and it does way too much damage. The one in the Defiled Chalice is even worse, and it has way too much health. The Beast-Possessed Soul is literally just the enemy under the source of the Hunter's Dream. The Keeper of the Old Lords is just a hunter without a gun. The Thumerian Descendant is annoyingly fast and has infinite stamina, so he sucks. Rom's back too. The Bloodletting Beast is just a big beast. It's easy enough, very similar to Cleric Beast and Vicar Amelia. There's another fight with Amygdala, and it's awful. Way too much damage. The Headless Bloodletting Beast is just Bloodletting Beast but with poison. Finally, there's Gehrman, the Thumerian Queen, the most unique of all the Chalice dungeon bosses. She can stun you on the third cry if you're listening. She can poison you, she can spawn clones. Other than that, there's not much she has. She's pretty easy, all things considered, but her health pool is a little high. Well, that's Bloodborne. Incredible game with some pretty big flaws. Dark Souls 3 might have worse flaws, but it definitely has higher highs, so I just can't put Bloodborne any higher. I got a PlayStation 4 just for Bloodborne, and ended up loving the game. I don't regret it at all, totally worth it. I did want to cover H-Bomber Guy's video, but that would have made this way too long. As a response to him though, you don't get to choose what fun is. I love playing with a shield, and it's way better than not. It doesn't engender passivity, it's a different kind of aggression. Glad to get that off my chest. Anyway, all I have to say now is don't play Bloodborne on PS Now. It's so much worse. Alright, time to record an outro. I'm recording this before editing this. This is insanely long. Just the audio file with the script is like an hour, 7-8 minutes, something like that. Which, this is going to take so long to edit. I'm really glad I did this though. I'm hopefully going to be doing the other ones. The other Souls games. I'm going to try to get as many out before Elden Ring because, I mean, these were originally done, or I originally did this one in order to wait for Elden Ring, but Elden Ring comes out in like 3 months because I spent forever not recording this. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Love you all. If you made it this far, you're great. Even if you watched it in parts, I really appreciate you watching my video. I don't know how to end this.